Hi, and welcome to this edition of Last Friday. I'm sitting here with Gia Drew, who is the program director at Equality Maine and also the board president at Maine Transnet. So this is going to be a pretty exciting show. Last Friday is filmed here at CTN, and it's a production of Maine Sky Media. Hi, Gia.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing
Great.
this evening?
Oh, great. I'm glad to be here with our friend, too.
Yeah, this is Wesley, I guess with introductions all around.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so we're both very excited to talk to you.
Cool.
And learn a little bit more about what you do.
Excellent.
So do you want to talk a little bit about Maine Transnet?
Sure. Yeah, I could talk a little bit about each organization, but so Maine Transnet is a nonprofit that provides support and resources to the transgender community across the state of Maine. We've been around for since 2005, which is really exciting. It's actually formed locally by a USM student who is trans and just wanted to connect with other trans people in the state. And that sort of grew into sort of people coming together and meeting each other. And then in 2009, we became an official nonprofit. And I've been with the organization since 2009, first as sort of someone going for support as a trans person, and then becoming a volunteer, and then a board member, and now I'm the president of the board of directors.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really great organization.
That's awesome. Can you explain a little bit about what the organization does?
Sure.
For people?
Yeah, and so the bulk of what we do at Maine Transnet is provide sort of peer support for transgender people to meet one another. And we do that with support groups all across the state. You know, like I said, we started here in Portland, you know, nearly about 10 years ago, and it was just Portland. And then we have Bangor, and now we have groups in Portland, Bangor, Lewiston, Brunswick, Biddeford, and we support other groups in Ellsworth and somewhere else, one other town, but I forget where that is. And so we do a lot of bringing people together, which is really important so people don't feel alone in their identities in Maine. We also offer support groups for allies, for significant family members and friends, so they can talk to each other and learn from each other what that experience is like. So that's the core of what we do at Maine Transnet. We also provide resources and referrals for folks if they're looking for how do I change my name, or how do I get a driver's license, or things like that, or how do I find the right doctor or therapist and things like that. And we also go into agencies and provide education on best practices when working with transgender people.
Wow, that's really important work. And I think it's good to know a lot. It's good to know that that kind of support exists.
Yeah, I think it's really important work. Having been someone who needed that support when I first started coming out and transitioning, I know for many people it can be really life-saving to know that you're not alone in the world, and that you're not a freak, and that there are other people in the world like you, and that you can have a really wonderful life.
That's awesome. So Maine Transnet also does Transgender Day of Remembrance, right?
Yeah, and so some of the other things we do, getting involved with local events across the state. Unfortunately, one of the most important days that we recognize is the International Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it's a day we recognize the transgender people each year who were murdered in the previous year. And so what we do is we gather. We usually have a few people speak about their own experiences. And then we read the names, if we have them, of the folks who were murdered in the previous year. And that can be pretty sad. I've been part of doing that for now probably 6 or 7 years, and it's emotional. And unfortunately, the numbers are not going down. And especially the numbers here in the United States. You know, just last year alone in the United States, I think there were over 50 reported murders of transgender people.
Wow.
And most of those are transgender women of color, unfortunately. And so there's lots of intersections between race and being trans. And there are a lot of dangers in the world.
Yeah, it's sad to see that the media doesn't really show any of those stories.
That's something that we try to work on, you know, where national media outlets are not picking up on that a little bit. You know, even last year was the first time a local media outlet actually came to one of our events. And that's after doing it for about 10 years. And so it took about 10 years to get a local media outlet to actually come and cover our local Portland T-Door. We call it T-Door.
T-Door.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody was interested in getting in touch with Maine Transgender Network,
Yeah, sure.
Maine Transgender Network Foley. I'm so used to saying Maine Transnet.
Well, yeah. So, officially it's Maine Transgender Network, Inc. But most people know it as Maine Transnet. Some people know it as MTN, which is fine. And you can go to maintransnet.org for more information about the work we do, contact information, and a listing of our support groups.
Oh, that's great. That's a valuable online resource.
Yeah, that's true. And then we have a Facebook page, of course, which is very active, ongoing information from around the country and the world on transgender issues. And then we do have some online support groups that we offer too, which is really exciting for folks who can't get to a physical location.
Well, that's good to know. So I was going to ask you a little bit about Orlando and just kind of that brought light of kind of the violence and the struggle that LGBTQ individuals deal with on a daily basis. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts you wanted to. Wesley!
Oh, well.
Sorry that your water is being drinking by a puppy dog.
Being put to good use, that's fine.
Well, that's good. So I was just going to, ask if you had any kind of thoughts or things that you would like to.
Sure. And so for many of us in the community, hearing and learning about Orlando was a shock, and it was very painful. Being someone who went to LGBT or gay clubs as a young adult, as the only safe place I knew in the world, and for many people that still is the only safe place in the world, is to go to a club. For that safety to be sort of violated was really painful. It was like someone, broke into your house and killed your family. And that's what it felt like for me. And being a leader in the community here, we worked with Equality Maine to what could we do to bring people together, to do some healing, to vent as well in the aftermath of such a tragedy, where someone killed 49, queer Latina folk mostly in Orlando. And I think one of the things that many of us thought of was, while this is one day where that many people died, that happens on a regular occurrence. We just don't hear about it, where people are dying every day. Whether they're taking their own lives because they're alone, or they're sad, or they're depressed, or they're being murdered, or things like that. And so the idea that violence happens only once when you have a tragedy, we know in the community that it happens all the time, and whether it's violence like a transgender murder, or whether it's sort of HIV and AIDS, which is still a big thing, and we don't talk about it enough, especially in the trans community. And so I think the idea that violence only happens once or twice a year is just, not the truth for many of us.
Yes, I would agree. So I'm glad that we're having you on the show to talk about some of these support groups that are out there, because I don't think it's talked about enough. So definitely, I know you helped to organize some of the vigils around Orlando. There was a beautiful vigil in Portland here, and just the community seemed to really come together with a lot of love and support.
Yeah, that was really special to be part of putting that together. Unfortunately, I have the skills to do that, putting together a Transgender Day of Remembrance for 5 or 6 years. And, what does it mean to have a vigil? The night before, there was a really passionate sort of gathering at Monument Square where people got to just sort of let it out. And that was really helpful for people just to come and let out their feelings. And I think that next night, we were asked to put something together because we had sort of the people power to do that. And, and we reached out to other agencies. We reached out to communities of faith to join us, folks from the Muslim community as well, and communities of color to come and talk and be part of that. And then we learned in the process that there were probably 5 or 6 other vigils across Maine going on simultaneously, which was really powerful. I mean, you saw the footage from Augusta and Bangor and other places across Maine where people were coming together to heal and feel safe about who they are.
Yeah, very critical to hold space for those stories and for people to really express themselves.
Sure.
And I mean, especially around Pride.
Yeah, that was kind of the other kick. The other thing that was like a kick in the stomach was happening. All this was happening like at the height of Pride Month in June, where we've already had a few Pride events in the state. I remember that day before I was at the first ever Belfast Pride, which was really exciting to be at. A few of my friends are organizers, and they put together this incredible event and brought hundreds and hundreds of people from the Mid-Coast area for Belfast Pride,
Wow.
which was really exciting. And we were celebrating that. And the same day there was the first ever Bar Harbor Pride, too, which was really great. And the weekend before was the second ever Central Maine Pride in Waterville. And we were just getting ready for Portland Pride and then Bangor Pride. And then this happened in Orlando. And, I think people around the country were just, it's really hard for that to happen in the month we're supposed to be celebrating who we are, to be attacked.
Yeah. So there was a lot of happiness for Pride, and then there was a lot of sorrow, and I think fear too in the community, which seems like the work that you do.
Yeah, there was definitely some palpable fear after Orlando. Am I safe to come to a Pride event? Am I going to feel safe? Am I going to be a target? Especially some of the young people I work with across the state, where they might not feel safe anyways in their own communities. They would email me or call me, like, I want to go to Pride, but I don't feel safe because of what happened. I don't want to be a target in that space. And that was really a hard conversation. I'm like, I get it. Come if you feel safe. Don't come if you don't feel safe. We can't, because we couldn't guarantee anyone's safety.
Yeah.
And I know here in Portland, the police said they were trying to do their best, and I'm sure they were. But, with the climate that we're in, if someone's determined to do something horrible, they probably will do it. And so, unfortunately, we live in a time where horrible things happen still.
Yeah, it seems like Maine sometimes is its own bubble, but even in Maine, violence does happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Maine is a very progressive state. We've been leading the charge in LGBT rights for nearly 30 years. We had the first out elected official in the entire country here in Maine, Dale McCormick, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
Nearly 30 years ago. We were one of the first states to pass non-discrimination laws that protect all LGBT people, including trans people, and that was, more than 10 years ago. And then we were the first state in 2012 to vote, with popular vote for marriage equality. And so Maine has been like on the forefront of LGBT rights since the very beginning. And so there is this sense of we're ahead of the game. And sometimes people get a sense of safety in some of the bubbles, especially in the Portland area. But you don't have to travel all that far or even leave Portland to not feel safe. There are 40% of all homeless youth are LGBT or Q. And many of those youth are here in Portland. And I know every night they may not feel safe because they might not have a place to sleep. And so that's a real issue in Maine is the homeless population and where so many of those folks are LGBT. And then the rural populations where maybe there is support and maybe there isn't support or family support. And, so there is still violence going on in the LGBT community.
Yeah. It seems like there's never enough work to do, huh?
Yeah, that's one of the things we'd love to put ourselves out of a job. But right now we know there is a lot of work still to do, and while we've achieved so much, we're learning that 8 in 10 youth today are still being harassed in schools based on their sexual orientation, and 4 in 10 youth are being physically assaulted on a regular basis.
Wow.
And so we're still trying to figure out how to change hearts and minds. We can change laws and policies, but we really have to get in and have those really hard conversations with folks.
Yeah. Well, it seems like now would be a good time to break. Brian, who produces this show, actually got a chance to go with Gia to the new Equality Center in Portland, which is going to be a big deal here to be on street level, 511 Congress, right?
Yeah.
And so really bringing all of these support groups to Portland's community. So maybe we can go to a break for that. And also we have a song for you from Liam and the Bees, which will be very exciting. So thank you, and we'll see you in a little bit.
All right, thank you, Kara. We are indeed here the day before with Gia Drew from Maine Transnet and Equality Maine in their brand new just moving into office on Congress Street. What's the number? Yeah, it doesn't matter what the number is.
511.
511 Congress Street, and the space is equality. No, equality.
You can
space,
do it.
community.
You can do it. You can do it.
Equality. Yeah, I
It's
know
the Equality Center.
Equality Center. It's awesome. Tell me about some of the other groups.
Yeah,
that are
it's
coming in
really
with you.
exciting to have this idea of an equality center
Yeah.
where like-minded organizations can sort of work under one roof
Yeah.
in a very sort of close space.
Right.
And so it'll be Equality Maine is one of the lead organizations,
Yeah.
and which is exciting to come here.
Yeah.
Maine Transgender Network, which
Yeah.
I also work with.
Yeah.
Sage Maine, which is an organization that supports LGBT elders.
Mhm.
PFLAG Maine, which is for parents and families of LGBT folk.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, they're a great organization. And then Pride Portland, and there may be one or two others. And it's
Yeah.
going to be a space for those organizations to use, but also a community center for folks who aren't associated with an organization who need some space to do some organizing, to hold meetings.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got the tour here, and there's a nice open space that you could probably get 40 people. Maybe it's a little heavy.
That's all right.
So yeah, it's a good open space though for meetings, and then you also have a conference
Yeah,
room.
that's great.
Good sized conference room, little kitchenette. I'm really jealous. I'm really jealous.
Well, this is not what you think of for like nonprofits, and so this was really special
Yeah.
for us
Yeah,
to get something that is a little
pretty gorgeous.
pretty cool.
actually,
Nice
yeah.
windows here,
Big,
clean
sunny
walls.
windows.
You know, and I think that's the idea of like combining our resources together is a really great idea.
Yeah, instead of being, because that's what the McPerry Center that I used to work with
Right.
and Kara used to work with, and we still, it's just on hiatus right now. And it was a number of groups in the social and environmental justice community. And so I would look for a space quite like this. That's why I'm jealous. But I'm really glad that you're going to be here in town. Tell me about, you were telling me earlier about the long-term plan.
Right.
The
Yeah,
long-term-
you know, this has been, I think, in a couple of years, there was a community meeting that we were part of almost 2 years ago now, where with community members of organizations, we're talking about what if we had a community center. But I think some other people, key people, like the owner of this space, Ed Gardner from Ocean Gate Realty, and some other folks who've been in the movement for a long time, we're thinking about, okay, what if we had a larger building space that could have housing for LGBT elders,
Right.
maybe a performance space,
Right.
and then some of the office space and community center,
Yeah.
all as one big thing. And I think that's the long range plan.
Yeah.
So this is kind of more like phase one, just
Right.
getting it started, get people in the door, and see how that goes.
Yeah, get right and figure out who's who cleans up after themselves and who
Well, that's true
right.
too, right? That's the learning curve, right?
And then make up rules as you go, because that's what happens. That's the way it works. That's
Common
how communities
space.
work.
Yeah, it's common space.
Yeah.
Having who gets
Yeah.
to use the conference room.
Yeah, but that it's right, and we had the very similar with the McPerry Center. You get a little frustrated with your neighbors sometimes.
Sure.
And then when we ended up closing down, we're on hiatus right now, and all of us miss it.
Of course.
We felt like we were pulling our hair out,
Right.
and then when we didn't have each other anymore,
Right.
it was
Yeah, and I think it's different for different organizations depending on the work they do. Whether you're doing direct service work or you're doing more community-focused work.
right.
Whether your clients are coming to you or you're doing some time here planning, but you're really going out into the world. So most of the work we do at Equality Maine is out in the community.
Right.
Whether we're doing education at schools or whether at the State House lobbying, we tend to be out in the community doing work. And other organizations like Maine Transnet that I also work with might be having support groups here too.
Oh,
so
cool.
that sort of that atmosphere too, where people will actually be coming here
Yeah.
for services.
Yeah, so it's kind of it opened. Yeah, it's not a day program, but whatever. It's open
It's
to the public.
multifunction, multi-use for
Right.
different ways.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting.
Right, and you've got your own offices. You can, whatever, if you needed to close and lock your doors.
Well, it's a really good point. A lot of some of the work we do is, confidential.
Yeah.
We're working for people who maybe need to have that private space and
Right.
the idea of safety. And I think that's an issue, is having a safe space for members of our community. Not everyone in
Right.
our community feels safe
Right.
wherever they are in the world, whether it's here in Portland or whether it's somewhere in rural Maine.
Yeah.
But creating a safe center space where they can walk in and feel good
Yeah.
about themselves is really important.
Right. So, say you have someone from the community that plays acoustic guitar, and they want to have a small,
Yeah.
intimate concert, like not concert, but
Yeah, sure.
show out front and at night, and you have your offices locked up, and so there's no one wandering through,
Right.
kind of thing.
And
That's
it's
wonderful.
it's a nice deal. It's also a welcoming space. If let's say you're new to Maine or Portland,
Yeah.
and you look like, where is the equality? Before, they were like, you could look up these 4 or 5 organizations, but no one was even like remotely centrally located.
Right.
So now we're all here.
Yeah.
People could stop in and what's going on, or thinking I'm moving to Maine, what kind of support systems are here for me, and then we can work with each other in the office.
Yeah.
Like when we get a referral, we can just turn to the people here. What are y'all doing on this issue? And
Right.
that's really cool too.
You know, that I just realized what that's going to spell out, which is so awesome, is that nationally it'll be like, where are great places to live, LGBT
Sure.
communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you start off with something like this, where there is a great hub,
Yeah.
and then maybe even, like you're saying, down the road, the larger
Mm-hmm.
center, even a larger center,
Yeah,
and,
right.
that attracts a bigger community.
It does. You know, I think Portland, Maine especially already has a reputation as a very queer, LGBT-friendly city, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it does lack in some areas.
Sure.
And I think, working together to address some of those shortfalls,
Yeah.
I think is a way to achieve some of those goals.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I love it. And they're right across the street from CTN 5 where we shoot the show.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm in the studio right now as we speak. The magic of television's the day before. Anyway, before I freak myself out being 2 places at once. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Sure.
letting me come in and take a look around in your brand
Yeah.
new place.
I'm glad you're here, and the sun came out. So.
Oh, look at that. Beautiful.
It's great.
Beautiful. Nice. So we'll see you tomorrow, Gia.
Great.
And we'll see you in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to be in the hood.
Right. Have lunch and all that kind of stuff.
Very cool.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Hey,
Sure.
we'll see you tomorrow.
Great.
Hey there, I'm Liam from Liam and the Bees. My music is at www.liamandthebees.com, and you can find me on Bandcamp too. The song that I'm about to play is called Gender Bender, and it's a song that really represents to me that gender changes for me every day. I've transitioned from female to something. Usually it's masculine, but I don't always know. So this song just sort of takes the negative parts and the hard things about being trans and looks at them as positives. So I will get started for you right now. Boyhood don't mean much to me. Yet all day, that's all I wanna be. Can't hide in my girl's skinny jeans. Gender, I don't know what you mean. It's been this way for much too long. Confused and unsure how to move along. Getting by alright, don't get me wrong. Gender bender, bending towards strong. I don't even believe in girl jeans. Yet somehow I'm still tearing at the seams. Stitch me into some grotesquerie. Good, 'cause weird is everything to me.
So we're back here with Gia. And let's talk a little bit more about this center in Equality, Maine and the work you're doing.
Yeah, great. Love to. So, like I said, the Equality Center is opening up right across the street at 511 Congress Street.
Which is awesome.
It's awesome. It's going to be downtown. It's kind of been a project people have been working on for the last couple of years. Community members, some real estate folks, members of different organizations had this idea of what if we all came together under one roof. And it took a little while to get to that place. We have a great location at 511 with Ocean Gate Realty, and they have a really great space. They're giving us a great deal. And there'll be about 5 or 6 organizations in one space.
Wow.
Equality Maine will be the lead organization in that space. But there'll be other organizations like Sage Maine, which is a LGBT elder organization. PFLAG Portland, which is the parents and families that support LGBT folks. Maine Transnet will be there as well. Pride Portland. And a few other organizations will be using the space as a community center. So that's really exciting to get people from different groups to come together under one roof.
Yeah, for someone to just be able to walk into the center and access all of these different groups, that's going to be almost revolutionary.
Yeah, maybe. There are many cities across the country that have LGBT centers. They've had them for years. New York is famous for we call it the center, where there's a performance space, there's places to have meetings and things like that. Even when I visit North Carolina frequently because of family members, and Raleigh has had a really great LGBT center for years. It's right downtown. You can walk right in and find out what's going on in the community.
Wow.
If you're visiting, what are some events you want to go to, where there are friendly hotels and things like that. And so there are more across the country. So I think for Portland, I think it's a really great step forward.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with all of the work that you've talked about Maine doing in general. So it seems like this is almost lagging behind all of that.
Well, I think for years people have been working in just on their own little, this is our task, this is what we have to do. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to come together more and work a little bit more, understand what each of us are doing, which is great. And so, Equality Maine has been working to advance the rights of LGBT folk for 32 years. And I started working and volunteering with them 4 years ago and got hired as their program coordinator almost 3 years ago, and now I'm their program director. And our work and our mission has really changed a little bit over the last 3 or 4 years, after so many victories at the policy level and at the state level in terms of marriage and non-discrimination. A lot of the work we're doing now is programming. A lot of the work is in education, going out to communities, bringing education, especially to schools and school districts, on how to better support LGBT youth. So that's a big component of what we do. We still do advocacy and stuff at the State House. Most of that is actually fighting back bad bills or people that want to repeal our rights. Unfortunately, that is ongoing. There's definitely been a backlash, not just nationally. We see that in North Carolina and places like Mississippi or Tennessee, but also here in Maine. There's been a foe of our community named Michael Heath, a longtime foe of our community. He's back. He actually has an official petition from the state where he's gathering signatures to remove sexual orientation as a protected class from the Maine Human Rights Act. And so we are very aware of that activity. And he's not alone, and we're just worried that he'll get some national support on that. And so we're watching that as well. So that's part of the work too.
Yeah, all of these organizations have been working so hard individually, so I'm glad that you'll have the support of each other.
Well, I think there's going to be some growing pains there too.
Of course, there always is.
We're so used to sort of working within our own communities, and I think it's going to be very healthy, but there's going to be some, bumps along the way, to get the trans community to work with maybe the LGBT community or an elderly community working with our youth work, things like that. I think that's natural. There's going to be some bumps along the way. But the long-term goal, like we mentioned in the piece earlier, to have a really vibrant center where maybe one day having some housing, especially elder housing for folks, performance space, and then some support, I think that would be really great.
Yeah, definitely. So would you like to talk a little bit more about Equality Maine and maybe the legislature and also the youth work you're doing?
Sure. So the stuff, like I mentioned, at the State House or locally is making sure we fight the bills that are coming up that are dangerous. Some of the work we did last year was all around a new Parentage Act, which is a really complex bill, but it was the first time this legislature had visited what makes a parent in about 25 years. And with same-sex parents or parents who are having children in non-traditional ways. We had to really address what makes a parent these days and how many people can be a parent, because we know that there are multiple parents in situations these days. And so that was a really important bill for the LGBT community that got through last year, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Some of the work we're doing at that level now is also ending transgender healthcare discrimination across the state. That's an ongoing battle that I've been part of for about 3 years. And so there's some small victories. Just this spring, the city of Portland is going to change their policy and now offer trans-inclusive healthcare to all their city employees and their dependents. They're the first city in Maine to do so.
Wow.
Which is really exciting. So our next goal is to get other cities on board to do the same.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
I guess I shouldn't have been surprised because I know some of the people who work in the city. So we went to meet with them. We had a really constructive meeting last year about what we think is best. And most of the people at the city level said, we didn't even know this was existing. And I think that's an ongoing battle where people didn't even know that transgender healthcare discrimination exists in corporations, in organizations, and municipalities, and unions. And so bringing it to their attention is just a first step. Doing some education is another step. And then showing them how to take those steps to make things right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you were talking a little bit about some statistics earlier that people might have been shocked to hear. So there's a lot of information missing from our mainstream media.
Especially what it means to be trans, and what the barriers trans folk have to face, whether it's in employment, getting a gainful employment, whether it's getting healthcare and competent healthcare. And so those are really big issues that we're confronting.
Yeah, human rights issues.
They are human rights issues, and I think that's something that we want to raise up as we do this work.
Is there any way that people who are watching might be able to get involved with that?
Of course. You can always reach out to Equality Maine. Just go to our website, equalitymaine.org, and there's a contact.
Awesome.
We're always doing new things, and we're always looking for volunteers to help us with the work. Some of the work that I'm doing now specifically is around youth, like I mentioned. And so this summer we run a LGBT Youth Leadership Academy, which is really exciting.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
the
right?
Leadership Academy.
Yeah, we call it the New Leaders Project. And we started it, I think, 2.5 summers ago. And this is our 7th incarnation. Sometimes it happens during the school year, and sometimes it happens in the summer. It happens at different places in the state. So we've had them in Rockland, in Bangor, Waterville, Lewiston, Portland, and this summer we're in Brunswick.
Wow.
Where we have about 12 youth from around the state of Maine who come to the location once a week for 5 hours. They're going to get 30 hours of incredible sort of skills and training. We've brought some great leaders from around the state from different fields, from communications, social justice, political action, taking action, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
They get to meet other young leaders from their communities, come together to meet each other, get some great new skills, and then they go back to their communities when school starts and they have some really good skills moving forward. And so we have 2 more sessions left, which is really exciting. This week we have a special guest from the ACLU talking about students' rights, which is really exciting. And then we have a history panel. We have some great people from Maine who've been part of LGBT history. And so they'll be talking with our youth about what it's been like for the last 30 years here in Maine.
Wow, that's amazing. Really bringing it to the next generation of leaders. And
yeah, that's what it is. The future is our young people, and I recognize that, and we recognize that empowering young people to make changes in their communities, to empower other people wherever they live or wherever they go is really important. So that's a really great project to be part of. Having been a high school teacher for 20 years, and now I do this work to, re-engage teenagers is really exciting.
That is exciting, and for teenagers to be involved and engaged in it too. So
yeah, and we try to do a lot of sort of pre-work with the young people. We ask them what are their concerns and needs.
Oh wow!
And so we tailor the program to what they think is important or what they want to address in their communities. And so with some advanced planning, we actually tailored the guest speakers and the programming to what was really on their plate. We have some students who want to sort of redevelop their health curriculum to make it more LGBT friendly in their town. And so we have a group of youth doing that. We have another group that wants to develop sort of LGBT inclusive theater and plays, and we had small group is actually writing a play, which is really exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, and so sort of understanding where they're coming from and not imposing on them what we think is important for them, but listening to what they think is important. Because what might be important in Yarmouth may be completely different than what's important in Gardner or somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so that's important as well.
Yeah, and empowerment the whole way through, it sounds like, really
Yeah.
tailoring to
It
them.
is, and it takes some time for young people who've never really been given the chance or opportunity to sort of have a voice or a say. So we do a little self-empowerment work, understanding and looking at our identities as marginalized parts of the population, and what that means, and how you can actually turn that into power, by coming together and working not just with, other LGBT folks, but other folks who are also marginalized. And what does that look like in a school? What does that look like in your community, wherever you are?
Yeah, because you were just mentioning before the break of how many, 40%
Yeah.
of the homeless youth population is LGBT.
Yep. And that's unfortunate. And we can understand why. Where young people are not being supported at home when they come out or affirm their own identities, or their schools are not prepared for them, or their churches. And so young people are deciding to leave, and they're couch surfing, they're hopping from place to place to place, they're running away. And here in Maine, there's very limited resources for young people who aren't at home. We call them out-of-home youth. And so in Portland, some resources. Lewiston has some great resources with New Beginnings. And then there's Shaw House up in Bangor. But that's about it for the entire state for homeless youth. So that's a really important, thing. We're also looking at, juvenile justice and how that impacts LGBT young people. We're looking at, sex work, which is something that young people turn to for survival, drug use, things like that. And so, there's a lot that hinges on, staying in a safe place in your home community versus running away. And so we're trying to look at, what are some solutions to that. And that is like community education, working with schools, working with families, and working with churches. And without, churches who are really challenging, what it means to be open and supportive, I think that has really made a big difference across Maine. That was the turning point in the marriage equality, was getting people of faith to talk about what love and marriage means and commitment. We still have to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So I think that can really help as well.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that even after, so I think a lot of people think of Equality Maine and they think of the marriage, but to learn about this work that's still ongoing, and I remember there being a lot of leaders of faith at the vigils for Orlando.
Right.
So it all seems to be coming together now.
It is. I had a really interesting conversation at that vigil. One of our goals was to reach out to faith folks to come and speak or be there and support just visually. And I went and said hi to a few of the folks ahead of time, and one of them was a priest. I'm not going to give away his name, but and he said he was a Catholic priest, and I was a little surprised. I'm like, knowing my background being raised Catholic, that I never felt supported being a bisexual, transgender person in the Catholic faith. And a lot of people feel the same way, that the Catholic Church has not been very forthcoming and supportive of LGBT people. But here was this priest who had showed up to show his support for our population. And he reached out to me after and said, I would love to meet and have a conversation to see what we could do better as a community here in Maine.
Wow, that's huge.
And I was really touched that they took those brave steps, because I know the church is not completely supportive at all. And so just for an individual to sort of step out and say, I'd like to learn more, was really, really wonderful for me, having been raised Catholic as well.
Wow. Well, that amazes me. I think that's I think we're coming up to the end of the show here, but I know. We could talk all night, but
okay.
Ending on what you just said, an individual can step outside and like really make a difference, and I think that's a really great way to end. But if there's anything else that you would like to talk about, I know you have your own personal consulting in addition to all of the hard work that you do. So there's multiple ways to get in touch or get support.
There is, and I think that's one thing. Not everyone can be out there in public and voice their opinion or show their support, but you can do it quietly too. Being a leader or being an advocate or being a great ally, you can do it in a different way. But if you do want to get involved or you do need support, please reach out to the resources. I think we're going to be sharing them. And as well. equalitymaine.org, maintransnet.org as well, or giadrew.com. I guess the first thing I would say is that, for me personally, my identity related to my sexual orientation and my gender is really a small part of who I am.
Right.
I'm a bisexual woman and I'm a transgender woman, but I'm a zillion other things too. I'm a daughter, I'm a niece, I'm an aunt, I'm a godparent, I'm a marathon runner, a triathlete, a writer, a nature lover, a partner, all those things. And so I think there's this assumption that my sexual orientation and my gender identity sort of is everything about me. And people want to ask questions about those things as if that completely defines me as a person. And so, unless it's a really important part of the conversation,
Right.
then maybe it's not even, shouldn't even come up. And especially for trans people, and I will say this, especially for trans people or gender non-conforming people or gender queer folk, there is this curiosity factor.
Yeah.
Where if I asked a group of 10 people, how many people someone who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, 8 or 9 out of 10 people will raise their hand. But if I say how many people, that same group, how many people know someone who's trans, right? You might get 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And so there is still this unfamiliarity around what it means to be trans. And I think people are just, genuinely curious to understand what that means. And sometimes, what does that mean in terms of asking questions? How can you be supportive and ask supportive questions and not be sort of invasive in those questions? And just, I think what I go back to is, how is it relevant? There's Google for a reason. And not to expect people in the LGBT community to be your teacher.
Yeah.
And I think because there are so many different identities that I am learning about on a regular basis, and that, there are identities and then there are labels people want to put on people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is let people self-identify. And if they bring it up, cool. If they don't bring it up, then probably it's, not part of the conversation unless it comes up in the conversation. So for example, one of the things that we do as common practice in most of our community conversations or phone calls is, we just do introductions right away every time, and just go around the room. Hi, my name's Gia. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. Boom. And we just do that. And that becomes so matter of fact in all our spaces. And so
Right.
most organizations that will be in the Equality Center do that second nature. When any meeting or any call, hi, my name's Gia. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. Just to sort of and not to put the pressure on one person, and sort of everyone gets to share who they are in that space. And we do that in our trainings with schools. We do that in our training with other agencies. That is sort of the best first practices you can do is have everyone introduce themselves, share a name that you go by, that you feel safe with, and what pronouns, if you use them. And that's a really great first step. It's just introducing people. So hopefully that helps. It's a big question, and so I can't tackle all of it.
Right.
And one, I'm white, so I'll never know what it's like
Sure.
to walk in those shoes as a person of color in this world. And so I will not dare to speak on that. I know I have tons of privileges as a white person. But I do know there are huge intersections between race and being queer, LGBT.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, last year 53 transgender women were killed. Most of those women were women of color.
Yeah.
Most of those women in the United States were black. And so there is a huge intersection between race and violence and being LGBT. Orlando, majority of people that were killed were Latina, and they were queer. And so there's a huge intersection between those worlds. And then here in Maine, I can't imagine those intersections coming together, where you have a very white state, if not the whitest state in the country. And if you're a person of color, you're going to be marginalized to begin with. And then you're LGBT as well. I mean, those are just really, really difficult places to be in. And I think that's something to pay attention to and to make space for people, especially people of color, and to give them a voice in this conversation. And around policing, that's another interrelated conversation. We try to work with agencies. The downside, there really isn't uniform training across the state on how law enforcement deals with LGBT people. What happens when they arrest or question someone who's trans or gender nonconforming, or maybe their identification doesn't match their identity. And so there is definitely some lacking in some cultural competency for law enforcement on how to respectfully deal with the LGBT community. It is a problem. It's a horrible problem. There is I don't remember all the acts. There's a lot of federal guidelines around what happens in prison or incarceration.
Yeah.
There's a Rape Reduction Act that does apply to that a little bit. But a lot of what happens is whoever is on duty that night determines where you end up, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
There is no we wish there was a uniform protocol. Here in Cumberland County, that's where we are, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. It's the only county that does have a policy in dealing with transgender folks who are incarcerated.
Oh, wow.
And so I believe that's Sheriff Joyce, who's actually been the sort of in the forefront of making those. And other sheriffs have actually referred back to that policy. So what are you doing in case something does happen? But unfortunately, those policies aren't in a day-to-day basis with other law enforcement across the state. And so we're ending up with trans women who are ending up in a male side or in prison, or they're putting them into what's it called?
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement.
I heard about that.
Which is not
healthy.
Not healthy. It's definitely not the best situation, and they do that without any sort of recourse, and it could be in there for a long time.
I think of even like a national figure like Chelsea Manning.
I was waiting for someone to bring that up.
Yeah, Chelsea Manning.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. And this is a really complicated. We get really weedy, get down in the weeds on this. The federal government is doing a really great job in some areas in defending trans rights across the country. Suing the state of North Carolina for their last law, HB 2. But at the same time, the way they're treating Chelsea Manning goes in contrast to the way they're arguing these other cases. So as you know, Chelsea Manning is a transgender individual who's being held because of huge things that they did in leaking secrets. But they are still a citizen. They're still due to due process, and their human rights are being violated right now in prison.
Yeah, as a whistleblower and as a trans.
Yeah, as a trans
individual.
person, and unfortunately, just a month ago, they tried to end their own life, and because of that, they're actually being punished, because that's what happens when you're in the military, and you try to end your own life. Is actually a punishment that's in part of that too, and so it really gets unfortunate that there's this case, but at least it's creating some dialogue for some people, and I'm glad you didn't forget about Chelsea Manning.
Oh, never.
You may not agree with what Chelsea did, but they're still entitled to basic human rights.
Yes, that's true. I was going to ask one more question.
Oh, good.
Go
good.
for it.
Just based off of that, was that actually at one of the vigils, they actually did talk at Black Lives Matter vigil, and they were talking about how transgender individuals that are trying to cross the border are kept in like solitary confinement.
Yeah, that came up this week at the Democratic convention, at least, where there was the Democratic side was talking a little bit more about that, especially, I forget who the individual was. They're talking about the folks who are in America, have come to America for all sorts of reasons, for safety, for freedom, for jobs, all those good things. But then if you're LGBT or you're trans, what happens then in terms of how the law applies, if the law applies, where they're housed while they're waiting for detention hearings and things like that. And so right now we're learning that people are being sent back to really dangerous situations where they were fleeing from. Mm-hmm. And that is unfortunate. And so that's an ongoing situation, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think going just the revolving theme around some of Brian's questions too are people not realizing the safety hazards that there are for the LGBT community, and asking some of the questions that they try to ask, or assuming things, or
Yeah, I would say that, especially for trans people, being a transgender person, some of the things that our community deals with on an ongoing basis can really be accumulative when you have microaggressions all the time, where you're constantly being afraid you're going to be attacked or questioned or sneered on or slandered or all sorts of things throughout the day. And so those build up over time, and it's hard not to feel, that you have a target on you. And that just it wears on you sometimes, and sometimes it gets tough and it's tiring.
yeah, it's tiring, and yet there's amazing individuals like yourself who continue to do work to make safe places for other people.
Well, one of my goals is to empower people to make changes in their lives and become part of the movement. I'm just one person. And so, it's kind of like what I want to do is get more people involved.
That's wonderful. Is there any other questions in the audience? Or sure.
I was curious how you're reaching out to kids, young adolescents,
Sure.
and or how they are reaching out to you.
Can I repeat?
Google?
Can I repeat
Yeah,
that question
sure.
just in case we didn't get it on the mic? So the question was, how is Gia in her
Gia,
work
right.
reaching out to youth?
Good question.
And how is youth finding you?
And how is youth finding you?
Great. So great question. One of my roles at Equality Maine is to serve on the statewide Supporting LGBT Youth Coalition, there was a statewide coalition of organizations that work with LGBT youth. Organizations like Outright Portland, Outright LA, Out Rockland, Out Bangor, Down East, GLSEN Southern Maine, Down East GLSEN. And so there are organizations all across the state that are working targeted LGBT youth.
And how are they targeting that? I mean,
Well-
through like churches and schools?
A lot of it is through schools. That's definitely one of the primary contact points is through schools, through clubs. A lot of schools now have clubs called GSAs or GSTAs, which are gay straight alliances or gay straight trans alliances, or rainbow leagues. So right now there are over 70 clubs in high schools across the state where young people can come together to feel safe and get some more resources. If the school doesn't have those clubs, there might be a really understanding or knowledgeable counselor or teacher, and they tend to refer them to those organizations I mentioned. And so here in Portland Outright is great. They have a drop-in center. Same in Lewiston, Auburn. Same in Rockland. Same in Bangor as well. So there are some resources out there for young people to learn more, to get more involved. Definitely on our agenda.
I was very impressed with the DNC presentation this week. I thought they were really, they educated and they were very inclusive. Absolutely it was orchestrated and they had.
Sure.
But I think it was a very strong communication for the population. And it seems like you have a great wave to ride on.
So talking about the DNC and the speeches that were made, or a speech that was made this week, and whether or not there's a wave of support, how does that feel?
I think there are many factors and forces going on between both conventions that happened over the last 2 weeks. You saw on one side some pandering to the LGBT community, on the Republican side, stumbling over how to say LGBT.
I was only saying the DNC.
I know, but in contrast, you have one side, but I will say there are some very inclusive Republicans, and I think that's where a lot of our conversations are. I just had we at Equality Maine, me included, just had a really wonderful meeting with Senator Collins a couple weeks ago in Washington to talk about issues where trying to get her to be a lot more vocal and supportive of our community, being the most, left side of the Republican side, to get her on board, I think is important. And then looking at what the DNC did is really exciting. Just last night, Sarah McBride was the first ever transgender person ever to address a national convention. It's about time, but it's important that the Democratic Convention realized how important it is to have those voices being heard.
This question is for Wesley. Are you a good dog?
Yeah.
Are you a good dog?
Wesley, are you a good dog?
This is a great dog.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Well.
I guess you can end the show now.
So yeah, well, thank you so much for being on the show, Gia. I think you've brought a lot to this edition of Last Friday. So I'm sad to wrap it up, but I'm looking forward to all the positive work that you will continue to do in our community.
Great. Thanks, Kara. This has been a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everyone have a great night. You've watched Last Friday. We're on every month on CTN. Check out Main Sky Media, and we're on Facebook as well as on website. Thank you.